I was standing at the kitchen island, my hands still sticky with cinnamon sugar, when my mother slid a manila envelope across the counter and said, "Just sign this real quick, honey. It's nothing serious, just a little paperwork to keep your house safe in case anything happens." She smiled that warm, motherly smile she always used when she wanted something, the same one she gave me when I was a kid and she needed help paying a bill or borrowing my car. I didn't even think to question her. The oven beeped behind me, the pie was done, and she was already pouring tea into our matching mugs like this was just another Sunday afternoon together. The air smelled like apples and cinnamon, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything was okay again. That's the thing about mothers. They know how to make you feel safe, even while they're taking everything from you. I glanced at the document without really reading it. The print was small, legal. She said something about needing to move a few things around to protect her credit, that it was temporary, and that of course the house was still mine, she was just trying to help. "After everything you've been through," she added, her voice soft with concern, "you shouldn't have to deal with this kind of stress. Let me carry it for a while." And like the idiot daughter I still was in some corner of my heart, I nodded and signed. I didn't think about it again for months. Not until the email arrived. It was a Thursday morning, and I was halfway through a client presentation when the notification flashed across my laptop screen. "Action required. Title transfer confirmation, Monroe property." At first, I thought it was spam, but then I saw the name of my street, my address, and the phrase that made my stomach drop. "Your upcoming property sale has been scheduled for final review. Please upload signature verification within 48 hours." I stared at the screen, frozen. I hadn't listed my house, I hadn't talked to any agent, I hadn't agreed to sell anything. I was barely even over the feeling that this place was finally mine. I ended the Zoom call early, mumbled something about a tech issue, and called the title company directly. The woman on the phone sounded cheerful at first, then confused. "Oh, the sale? That was initiated by Linda Monroe. She's listed as the sole owner of the property." I don't remember what I said after that. I think I asked her to repeat it. I think I asked if there was some mistake, but the voice on the other end of the line didn't waver. According to their records, my mother owned my house, not me. I hung up, my fingers numb, my thoughts racing. My hands were shaking as I pulled the manila envelope out of the junk drawer. It had been sitting there for months, untouched, ignored. I unfolded the document and read it for the first time. Not a power of attorney, not a credit shield, a gift transfer of property. A legally binding declaration that I, Claire Monroe, had voluntarily and irrevocably gifted my house to Linda Monroe, my mother. I sat on the floor in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by the home I had built with my own hands, with my own money, with my own pain, and realized it wasn't mine anymore. She had taken it, smiling, with tea and pie and that same warm voice that always sounded like love but was really control. And the worst part? I had handed it to her. I signed it. I trusted her. That's when it hit me. She had planned this, and if I didn't do something fast, I'd be out of my own home. The woman who raised me had just stolen the roof from over my head. The first thing I did was call Samantha. She was the only person I knew who could tell me if what I was feeling was panic or paranoia. We'd met in college, stayed close through the mess of our 20s, and even when we drifted apart, we always found our way back. She became a real estate attorney a few years ago and had warned me back when I bought the house to be careful with ownership documents. "People get sloppy when it's family," she once said. "That's when the worst mistakes happen." I never thought I'd be the example. I didn't even say hello when she picked up. I just blurted it out. "Sam, I think my mom stole my house." That silenced her for a beat. Then, calm and professional like she always was when something was serious, she said, "Okay, I'm listening. Tell me everything, and don't leave anything out." I told her about the envelope, the pie, the tea, how it felt like nothing in that moment, how she'd called it temporary, how I hadn't even read the damn thing, how the title company now said my mother was the sole owner. I could hear Samantha scribbling notes as I spoke, her breath catching only once when I mentioned the exact wording on the email, gift transfer. When I finished, she didn't rush to comfort me. She didn't sugarcoat it. "Claire," she said carefully, "you signed a quitclaim deed. You legally gave your property to your mother. If it was notarized and filed properly, she owns it, on paper at least. I gripped the edge of the counter like it might keep me from collapsing. But she told me it was to protect me. She said it was temporary. Samantha sighed, and I could hear the frustration building in her voice. Not at me, but at how familiar this story was. That's what makes it legal fraud, Claire, not just a mistake. If she misrepresented what she was asking you to sign, especially with the intent to mislead you, then it can be challenged in court. But it's not easy. You'll need proof. Proof. The word hit me like a punch. What did I have, really? A memory of cinnamon tea and soft manipulation? Her calling it temporary? The smell of the pie? I couldn't believe I was even having this conversation. I opened my laptop and started pulling up everything I could. Emails, texts, anything that might hint at what she'd said, how she'd framed it. Most of our conversations had been in person or over the phone, but there was one text, sent the day after I signed, that made my stomach flip. "Thanks again for helping with the paperwork. I promise it's just for a little while, you'll see. I'll make you proud." I screenshotted it and sent it to Samantha. "That helps," she texted back. "It's not definitive, but it shows her intent wasn't what the paperwork says. Keep looking." I started digging through shared folders. We had a family Google Drive, mostly full of recipes, scanned insurance forms, stuff my mom thought was convenient to keep in one place. I'd always thought it was harmless. That was until I opened a folder called House Docs that I'd never noticed before. Inside was a PDF dated 3 weeks before I signed anything. It was titled Pre-Listing Agreement, Monroe Property. The agent listed was someone named Shannon Bell. I didn't recognize the name, but the signature on the document made my blood run cold. It was my mother's, bold and flowing, right next to the phrase, "I, the property owner, agree to list the house located at 1732 Elkhart Place for potential sale." The document was time-stamped. She'd planned to sell the house before she even asked me to sign anything. I sent it to Samantha without comment. She called me immediately. "She was preparing the sale before you signed?" "Claire, this is big. This shows premeditation. She knew exactly what she was doing. We can use this. And the agent, she's a licensed party. That means we can subpoena her if needed." My chest tightened with something sharp and burning. Anger. Not the quiet kind I'd felt when I first read that email. This was rage, the kind that makes your hands tremble and your jaw ache. My own mother had orchestrated the whole thing behind my back, like I was too dumb or too trusting to notice. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the dining table with every light on, documents spread out around me, phone buzzing with Samantha's follow-up texts. She was already sketching out a legal plan. First, we file a petition to void the transfer on grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. Second, we flag the property title with a dispute claim so she can't finalize the sale. Third, we gather every piece of communication, texts, emails, voicemails, anything that shows she misled you. I nodded through the phone like she could see me. "Do you think we can win?" I asked, and my voice sounded smaller than I liked. She paused. "If we can prove her intent, yes. But Claire, this is going to get ugly. You need to prepare for that." I thought about that phrase long after the call ended. Get ugly. What did that even mean? She was my mother, the woman who brushed my hair before school, who made me chicken soup when I was sick, the woman who said she wanted to protect me. How was I supposed to go to war with that? But then I looked around the room, the one I painted myself, the shelves I built, the couch I saved up for, and I realized it wasn't hers. She hadn't lifted a finger to build this life. She was just here to take it. The next morning, I drove to the title company in person. I needed to see it. I needed to know it was real. The receptionist was polite but cautious, and after checking my ID, she confirmed what I already knew. "Yes, ma'am, Linda Monroe is the current title holder of the property. The transfer was filed 3 months ago and certified by a mobile notary. We have all the paperwork on file." I asked if I could see it. She hesitated, but then handed me a copy. I stared at my own signature. It looked exactly like mine. Because it was. No forgery, no trickery, just a clean signature on a document I didn't read because I trusted the person handing it to me. I drove home in silence. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, but I didn't look. Not until I pulled into the driveway and saw her car. My mother was sitting on the porch, sipping coffee like she hadn't just dismantled my entire life. I didn't get out of the car right away. I sat there gripping the wheel, heart pounding. She looked up, smiled, and waved, like nothing had happened. Like we were still mother and daughter and not two people standing on opposite sides of a legal battle. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to demand she fix it. But I knew, deep down, I wasn't going to get answers. Not real ones. So I just sat there, staring at the woman who raised me, realizing for the first time that she never really saw me as her daughter. Only as an asset, a house, a signature, and maybe she never did. I didn't speak to her that day, I couldn't. I parked my car in the street instead of the driveway, walked right past her on the porch without making eye contact, and went straight into the house that technically, legally, no longer belonged to me. I could feel her eyes on my back, waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to ask for an explanation or forgiveness, or maybe just to beg her to stop. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. If she wanted to play this as a silent war, I would meet her with silence of my own. I locked the door behind me and pressed my back against it, my chest rising and falling too fast. It was surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's life. I walked through each room like it might vanish beneath my feet. Every surface, every corner had my fingerprints on it, the result of months of work, of effort, of scraping by and saving up and finally feeling like I'd built something that was mine. But now I knew better. It had never been safe. It had never been mine, not really. Samantha was relentless over the next 2 days. She had me pulling every single communication I'd had with my mother over the last year. Texts, emails, call logs. I forwarded everything to her without reading most of it. I couldn't. Every love you at the end of a message made my stomach turn. Every smiley face now felt like a mask, but one thread caught my eye. It was from a few months back, before the signature, before the pie. My mom had messaged me, saying she was worried about debt collectors looking into her accounts. "They're making threats," she wrote, "just thinking out loud, but maybe we should find a way to make sure the house is protected, just in case something happened to you, not trying to scare you, sweetie." I remembered brushing it off at the time, assuming she was just having one of her drama spirals. But now it read like the opening move of a long con. She'd planted the seed and I'd ignored it. I forwarded the message to Sam and she replied with one word: premeditated. That same day, I received an unexpected email alert. It was a notification from a third-party listing site. My address had been added as an active presale property. Attached was a PDF brochure with staged photos of my living room, bedroom, kitchen, my furniture, my paint choices, my decor. It was like looking at my life through someone else's eyes, presented to strangers with a price tag. I clicked through the images until I found one that made my heart stop, a picture of my home office, where my vision board was still pinned above my desk. In the center of it, in big block letters, I'd written stability, freedom, safety. I stared at it, then at the company watermark in the corner, Bell & Co. Realty. Shannon Bell, the same name from the pre-listing document I found in the shared drive. Fueled by fury and desperation, I called the agency. I didn't even think through what I was going to say. When the receptionist picked up, I asked for Shannon. She was out, but the woman offered to take a message. I said I was calling about 1732 Elkhart Place. There was a pause, then a slow, cautious, "Are you the buyer?" "No," I said. "I live there. I'm the current occupant." Another pause. "Oh, I see." Her voice dropped. "Is there an issue?" "Yes," I said. "There is. That house is being listed without my consent, and I'd like to know how and when you received authorization to photograph and promote it." She got flustered, promised Shannon would call me back immediately. She never did. That night, I got a voicemail instead. It was Shannon, professional and clipped. "Hi Claire, this is Shannon Bell returning your call. I was under the impression that all parties were in agreement regarding the sale of the property. Linda Monroe provided documentation proving ownership and stated that you were relocating and aware of the process. If there's been a miscommunication, I'm happy to discuss it further. Feel free to reach out." Miscommunication. That word hung in the air like smoke. She was covering herself already, which meant she knew something was wrong. And the part that really punched me in the gut stated that you were relocating. My mother was already telling people I was leaving, as if I was just gone, as if this had been decided, finalized, and filed. I sent the voicemail to Samantha, and within the hour she had drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to Shannon Bell, her brokerage, and Linda Monroe. We demanded that all marketing of the property cease immediately, and warned that the listing was under legal dispute. Samantha was methodical and ruthless in her language. I didn't understand half the legal terms she used, but I understood the message. Back off. This is not over. This is war. She also filed a lis pendens with the county, a formal notice of pending litigation tied to the title of the property. It wouldn't stop my mother from trying to sell, but it would throw a massive wrench into the process. Any buyer would be legally required to know that the title was in question. No sane person would move forward under those conditions. Then came the voicemail from Derek. My brother hadn't spoken to me in weeks, not since he found out I got the house. He'd made a few passive-aggressive comments back then about how lucky I was to be the one who landed on her feet after Dad died, about how some of us don't get fresh starts. But we never fought, not openly. That changed now. His voice was low, deliberate, with an edge I'd never heard before. "Hey, Claire," he said. "Look, I don't know what the hell you're doing, but Mom's freaking out. You signed the papers, she's within her rights, don't make this a whole thing, you still have time to fix it before it gets out of control. Don't be stupid." I played the message twice. The first time I felt sick, the second I felt something else. Clarity. He knew. He'd known from the beginning. I called Samantha and told her what he said. She asked if I could get it in writing. "We can't use a voicemail unless we establish context," she explained. "But if he texts you something, anything that acknowledges what your mom did or what they planned, it could strengthen the misrepresentation claim." I didn't want to bait my brother. I didn't want to pretend to play nice, but I wanted my house back more than I wanted to protect him. So I texted, "You said I still have time to fix it. What did you mean?" He replied within 5 minutes, "Mom just wants to close the deal. Once the sale is done, she'll cut you in. Better than nothing. Don't blow this up just because you're emotional." I screenshotted it and sent it to Sam. I felt numb. Derek didn't see me as a sister. My mother didn't see me as a daughter. I wasn't family. I was a loophole, a shortcut, a check they wanted to cash, and I was done pretending otherwise. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop and started listing every expense I'd paid since buying the house, every deposit, every piece of furniture, every renovation. I wrote down every quote from their messages that hinted at deception, every receipt I had saved, every hint of premeditation. It was all going into the record, not just for the court, but for me, because I wasn't going to let them rewrite my story. Not this time, not ever. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my mother with the subject line, "Let's talk before lawyers get involved," as if we weren't already deep into that territory. I didn't open it right away. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, just staring at the glowing subject like it might disappear if I waited long enough. But it didn't. Nothing disappeared anymore. Not the betrayal, not the fake smiles, not the mountain of proof that my own family had orchestrated the quiet theft of my home. Eventually, I opened the email, expecting some desperate attempt at reconciliation, maybe even a watered-down apology. But it wasn't that. It was 5 paragraphs of manipulation disguised as concern. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You know I would never hurt you. We're family, Claire, and families should trust each other." She framed it all as a misunderstanding. She claimed she only listed the house because she thought I was planning to leave the city. She even had the audacity to write, "You're so talented you could rebuild anywhere. This place has always been too small for your ambition," as if taking my house was a favor. I forwarded the email to Samantha and added, "She's starting the gaslight phase." Samantha responded with a thumbs up emoji and then more formally, "Let's keep everything. Every message, every voicemail, every word. We'll need it all." So I made a folder called Legal War and began dragging files into it. Every photo, every text, every shared doc from the family Google Drive. I downloaded the listing brochure again. I took screenshots of my brother's texts, her voicemail, even the family group chat from months ago when she casually mentioned reorganizing some property stuff, which I now saw for what it really was, a breadcrumb of a bigger plan. I wasn't just being stolen from, I was being rewritten. They were shaping a version of me that was unstable, dramatic, ungrateful. The daughter who didn't know what she was doing, the sister who couldn't handle pressure. That was the version they needed if they wanted this to work, and I wasn't going to let them build it. That afternoon, I dug through the files on my home security system. I had installed a camera in the living room after a break-in scare last year, and I remembered it recorded audio. It had a wide-angle view of the entire kitchen, and sure enough, I found the footage from the day I signed the papers. There we were, Me, my mother, the pie, the tea. I watched myself laugh at something she said, probably some comment about work or my ex, and then I saw her slide the manila envelope across the counter. I watched myself pull out the document. She leaned over, pointing at a spot on the page. "Just sign right there, sweetie," her voice said on the recording. "It's just a precaution. I talked to Samantha once about stuff like this, it's no big deal." I paused the video. That line hit me like a slap. She invoked Samantha's name. She made it sound like this was already vetted, approved, safe, like she had spoken to my lawyer friend and gotten her blessing. A lie so casual, so effortless. I could hardly believe how easy it came to her. I sent the video to Samantha. 10 minutes later, she called. "Claire, this is gold, not just because she lied, but because she invoked my name. That's legal misrepresentation. She used my supposed authority to manipulate your consent. This changes everything. She was already drafting a supplemental affidavit to attach to our petition. It would accompany the security footage, the texts, the emails, everything we'd gathered so far. Our case was shaping up to be more than strong. It was airtight. But that didn't mean the war was over. My mother was quiet for a day after the cease and desist was delivered. So was Derek. Then came the retaliation. First, it was subtle. A few Facebook posts from distant relatives, cousins I barely spoke to, commenting about how sad it is when families fall apart over money. Then came the vague status updates from my mother. Sometimes the people you raise turn into strangers. Doing what's best for your children doesn't always mean they understand right away. And then, of course, came the direct messages. "Claire, your mom's heartbroken. Is there a way to fix this privately? Don't let outsiders ruin your relationship with your family." It was coordinated, polished, a whisper campaign to reframe me as the villain. I didn't respond to any of them, I just saved the screenshots. Then came the official notice. A courier showed up at my door and handed me a formal letter from a local family law attorney representing my mother. It was a preemptive notice of intent to pursue guardianship over Claire Monroe due to concerns about mental competency and emotional stability. I read the letter 3 times. It said that my mother feared I was making impulsive, destructive decisions that could endanger my well-being. It claimed that I had been exhibiting signs of paranoia and instability and that she was considering a conservatorship petition to protect me from myself. My hands shook as I lowered the paper. This wasn't just about the house anymore. They were trying to take my autonomy. I called Samantha. I couldn't even speak at first. I just breathed into the phone. "She's trying to declare me incompetent," I finally said. Samantha didn't hesitate. "Come to my office right now. We're shutting this down before it starts." When I arrived, she already had a game plan. We'd file a formal response to the guardianship threat, attach a psychological evaluation from an independent therapist, and submit proof that the claims were retaliatory in nature. She even pulled case law examples where similar attempts had backfired spectacularly. "They're desperate," she told me. "This isn't about winning, it's about intimidation, but it's not going to work." We filed everything the next day. That night, my mother called. I didn't answer. Her voicemail was 3 minutes of sobbing and guilt. "You're tearing this family apart," she cried. "You're letting strangers tell you how to treat your own mother. I never meant to hurt you, I just wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. This isn't you, Claire. This is Samantha getting in your head." I saved the voicemail. I added it to the growing archive. Because every word, every sob, every manipulation was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I was right. Proof that I was finally seeing the truth. I stopped answering calls. I stopped replying to texts. I stopped giving them the satisfaction of any reaction at all. From that point on, every piece of communication from my mother or Derek went straight to Samantha, who cataloged everything like evidence in a crime scene. Because that's what this had become, a crime, not just of property, but of trust, identity, and psychological warfare. And the more I pulled at the threads, the more I realized how deep their betrayal went. It started with a single line in a bank statement I hadn't looked at in months, an automatic withdrawal labeled Title Advance Services. I didn't recognize it, so I started digging. It led me to a financial services firm that specialized in quick cash loans secured by pending real estate sales. I called, pretending to be Linda Monroe's assistant, and asked if she had an account with them. The woman on the phone paused and said she couldn't release client information without verification, which was all I needed to know. I gave Samantha the company name, and within a day, she'd filed a formal subpoena request to reveal any transactions tied to my property's address. The results were worse than I expected. My mother had already taken in advance nearly $40,000 based on the projected sale of the house. That meant she wasn't just thinking about selling, she had committed to it financially. If the deal didn't go through, she'd owe that money back immediately. That explained the urgency. That explained the manipulation. She wasn't just trying to take my house. She was trying to cash it in before I could stop her. Samantha was livid. "This crosses into full-on fraud," she said. "She's leveraged an asset she doesn't fully own, and she did it by lying about how she got it. We can use this." Meanwhile, I started noticing subtle changes in my daily life, strange calls from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails from realtors and loan officers offering services I hadn't requested. One even left a message saying, "I understand you're looking to downsize after the transfer. Congrats on the sale." I hadn't spoken to anyone, but clearly someone had. My name was being passed around like a file. My information was being used as if I were already gone. It was like I'd been erased from my own life, replaced by a version of me that agreed to all of this. That terrified me in a way nothing else had. Because it wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about control. They were reshaping reality, rewriting me out of it completely. Then I made the mistake of opening Facebook. I hadn't logged in since things started, but curiosity got the better of me. The first thing I saw was a long public post from Derek. It was a carefully crafted story about family misunderstanding, about how our mother was only trying to protect the family legacy, and how some people let their lawyers and paranoia turn love into lawsuits. The comments were full of sympathy. For them, people I hadn't spoken to in years chimed in with, "Stay strong," and "Family comes first," and "She'll come around eventually." I felt like I was screaming in a soundproof room. They were winning the narrative, at least publicly. But I wasn't going to fight them there. I didn't need sympathy clicks. I needed legal victories. Samantha brought in a forensic financial investigator. His job was to trace every cent I'd spent on the house, mortgage payments, upgrades, utilities, taxes. We built a financial timeline that proved not only my ownership and investment in the property, but also the fact that my mother had contributed nothing, not a dollar. She hadn't even helped paint the damn walls. Meanwhile, she'd been using my house as collateral and funneling that cash into her own expenses, casino withdrawals, credit card debt payments, a deposit on a cruise vacation that had been mysteriously canceled after the cease and desist. It was all there, in black and white. And then came the worst discovery of all. The investigator found a line item on a loan application that listed me as a silent guarantor on a $25,000 small business loan. I had never signed anything. I had never agreed to anything. But when we requested the paperwork, there it was. My name, my fake signature, and a forged copy of my driver's license that had clearly been scanned from an old document in my Dropbox folder. Even though my aunt had died, my Dropbox folder still features my photo in my Dropbox folder. My breath caught when I saw it. My stomach turned. They hadn't just stolen my house. They had started using my identity. This was identity theft, financial fraud. It was criminal. Samantha escalated immediately. We filed a full complaint with the District Attorney's Financial Crimes Division. The paperwork now included forged loan documents, falsified listings, unauthorized access to personal records, and a fraudulent property transfer obtained under false pretenses. "They didn't just cross the line," Samantha said. "They torched it." And still, my mother continued her performance. She sent handwritten notes to my door. "Please talk to me. We can fix this. I still love you." I saved every one of them in a folder labeled manipulation. I didn't even cry when I read them. That part of me was long gone. What hurt the most wasn't the money or even the legal chaos. It was the realization that my mother, this woman who raised me, who told me bedtime stories and taught me how to tie my shoes, had never truly respected me. She'd respected what I could provide: the house, the stability, the calm she could step into when her own world was burning. I had been her plan B, her emergency fund, her safety net. And when I stopped playing that role, she tried to remove me from the picture entirely. But I wasn't disappearing, not this time. We added the forged documents to our civil suit and updated the criminal complaint. Samantha contacted the loan provider and flagged the fraud, which led them to open their own internal investigation. The financial advance company suspended my mother's account pending legal review. One by one, the doors she had opened with my name began to shut in her face. And still, I stayed silent publicly. I didn't defend myself online. I didn't respond to messages. I let them talk, let them post, let them believe whatever helped them sleep at night, because soon enough, the only place that would matter was court, and there the truth wouldn't need to trend. It would be undeniable, documented, stamped, filed. Permanent. And that was exactly what I wanted. The court hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning 2 months after I discovered that my house had been stolen. By then, the case file was thick. Hundreds of pages of documentation, affidavits, screenshots, bank records, signed statements, and expert evaluations. Samantha had worked like a machine, coordinating every angle, anticipating every possible defense, and building a strategy so tight it practically snapped into place on its own. But still, as I sat outside the courtroom waiting to be called in, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. My palms were sweating, my throat was dry, and all I could think about was the absurdity of it all. How did it come to this? How did I go from signing a piece of paper over a cup of tea to preparing to face my mother and brother in court like they were strangers? But maybe that was the truth. Maybe they were. When they finally called our case, I stood, smoothed my jacket, and walked in with my back straight. My mother was already seated with her attorney, a man with tired eyes and a polished smile that didn't quite reach his face. Derek sat behind her, arms crossed like he couldn't be bothered. He didn't look at me. She did, though. She gave me this small performative nod, like we were still pretending this was a family matter instead of what it really was, a legal war zone. She didn't return it. The judge was a middle-aged woman named Justice Aldridge, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and refusal to tolerate emotional theatrics. I remember thinking, thank God. Samantha began with a precise, methodical opening statement. She laid out the sequence of events, how I purchased the property, maintained it, lived in it, and then, under a clear instance of misrepresentation and manipulation, signed a quitclaim deed, believing it to be something else. She played the security footage. Everyone in the courtroom watched as my mother smiled and said, "It's just a precaution. I talked to Samantha once about stuff like this." My stomach twisted hearing her voice again, but I didn't look away. Samantha emphasized how invoking her name as legal counsel constituted a deliberate attempt to manipulate consent. She presented the text messages, the pre-listing document from weeks prior to the signature, and the subpoenaed financial records, showing that my mother had already received an advance based on a sale she had no legal right to finalize. Then came the forged loan application, my signature replicated without consent, tied to a $25,000 business loan with my name as guarantor. Their lawyer responded with a weak defense that I had signed the paperwork of my own volition, that I was emotionally unstable due to personal struggles, and that my mother was simply trying to protect the family's financial well-being. He attempted to discredit me with vague references to my divorce, stress migraines, and an alleged emotional breakdown I'd had years ago. Samantha objected immediately, and the judge sustained it. "Keep it relevant," she warned, her voice sharp. Then, my mother took the stand. She played her part perfectly, calm, composed, teary-eyed in just the right moments. She spoke about raising me alone after my father died, about how much she loved me, how scared she was for me after my marriage ended. She told the court she believed I wasn't thinking clearly, that she only asked for the transfer because she was terrified Claire would lose everything. She said she never intended to sell without my blessing. "I just thought she needed time," she said, voice cracking, "and space, and maybe a little protection from herself." I wanted to scream, not because it was convincing. It wasn't, but because it was rehearsed. This wasn't confusion. This was strategy. Samantha didn't flinch. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she dismantled everything piece by piece. "You stated you believed Claire needed protection from herself. Can you explain why you took a $40,000 advance using the house as collateral without notifying her?" my mother stammered. "It was just to pay off some debts. I was going to pay it back once things settled." "You mean once the house sold?" "Well, yes, technically, but Did you also apply for a loan using her identity?" "No, that must be some kind of mistake." "We have the documentation here. Are you saying this signature," she held up the forged form, "is not a scan from Claire's Dropbox folder which you accessed on her laptop?" My mother froze. "I didn't mean to—" "Answer the question, Ms. Monroe." She didn't. She just looked away. Then it was my turn. I took the stand. hands shaking slightly as I was sworn in. Samantha kept it simple. She had me walk the court through what happened the day I signed the quitclaim, what my mother said, what I believed. She asked about my history with the house, my financial contributions, the renovations, the repairs, the years of work I'd put in. Then she asked how I found out it was no longer mine. I described the email from the title company, the phone calls, the discovery. The courtroom was silent as I recounted how I opened a manila envelope, thinking it was nothing, and realized months later I had handed my entire life over to someone who used to kiss my forehead goodnight. The judge asked a few questions. One stood out. Ms. Monroe, do you believe your mother acted with the intent to defraud you? I looked right at her and said, yes, Your Honor. I believe she planned this. I believe she manipulated me, and I believe she would have gone through with the sale and left me with nothing if I hadn't caught her in time. That was the moment. I saw it in the judge's eyes, the shift, the understanding, the weight of it. She took 2 weeks to deliberate. During that time, I barely slept. I lived in limbo, knowing my home, my safety, was still technically someone else's asset. I tried not to think about what would happen if we lost, if she managed to keep the house, or worse, sell it out from under me before the decision came. But I kept reminding myself, we had the truth, we had the proof, and the law, at least this time, was on my side. When the verdict came in, it was swift and uncompromising. The judge declared the quitclaim deed null and void on the grounds of misrepresentation and undue influence. She cited the security footage, the pre-listing documents, the text messages, and the forged financial records as evidence of a clear, calculated effort to mislead. The title was restored in my name. The court ordered a freeze on all future transactions related to the property without my explicit consent. The advance loan company was notified, and my mother was instructed to repay the funds or face further legal action. The forged loan was declared fraudulent, and Derek was named as a co-conspirator in the misuse of my personal information. I didn't cry when I heard the verdict. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled for the first time in weeks. Samantha squeezed my hand. "It's over," she whispered. But it wasn't, not really. There was still the aftermath, the wreckage, the knowledge that my own mother would have sold me out for a check and never looked back. But at least now I had something they could never take again. Not just my house, but my clarity. And that finally felt like a kind of justice. The morning after the verdict, I woke up before sunrise and sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, coffee in hand, watching the light stretch slowly over the trees. It was quiet. No lawyers, no notifications, no courthouse appointments, no threats disguised as phone calls or emails pretending to be concerned. Just stillness. And me. I hadn't felt that kind of silence in months. Not the silence of tension or avoidance, but the kind that feels earned, the kind that feels like peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't wake up with my heart racing or my jaw clenched. I didn't reach for my phone to check what new line had been crossed. I just breathed. I hadn't spoken to my mother or Derek since the ruling. Samantha told me they were still trying to figure out their next move. There was talk of filing some kind of civil countersuit, but it was weak, hollow, and based entirely on the idea that my reaction had emotionally harmed the family. I laughed when I heard that. Emotional harm? As if being lied to, stolen from, gaslit, and nearly erased was something I should have accepted with grace and a thank you card. Let them try. The truth had already been made public. In court, on record, backed by documents and video and legal statements. There was no taking that back, no editing the narrative now. Their lies didn't hold anymore. But it wasn't victory that consumed me as I sat there in the soft morning light. It wasn't even anger. It was something heavier, something quieter. Grief. Not for the house, I had that back now. Not even for the money, or the time, or the humiliation I'd endured. It was grief for the version of me that had believed in them. That girl was gone. The one who trusted unconditionally, who thought family meant protection, who believed that love, no matter how flawed, would never turn into weaponry. I had watched her get dismantled piece by piece these last few months, until there was nothing left but someone who knew better. Later that day, I met Samantha for lunch. It was the first time we'd sat across from each other outside of a legal office in months. She ordered wine, I didn't. She smiled at me and said, "You held the line, Claire. Most people would have caved." I didn't know what to say to that. I hadn't felt strong through any of it. I had just felt cornered. But maybe that's what strength really is, doing what needs to be done even when you feel like you're breaking. I thanked her not just for the legal work, but for believing me, for standing with me, for reminding me that I wasn't crazy when everything around me tried to convince me otherwise. That night, I went through my house slowly, room by room, touching everything like it was new, because in some way it was. This wasn't just a place I owned now, it was a place I had fought for, a place I had almost lost. And every piece of furniture, every floorboard, every chipped paint corner told the story of someone who survived. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the drawer where I'd shoved the envelope, the one that started all of this. It was empty now, but I could still see it, still feel the moment my signature landed on the page. That was the last time I gave something away without understanding what it would cost me. I updated my will that week. Samantha helped me write a clause that designated a portion of my estate to a nonprofit that provides legal aid to women facing family-based financial abuse. It felt right, not dramatic, not performative, just purposeful. If what happened to me could help someone else escape it, then maybe it wasn't all just destruction. Maybe it was transformation. I also removed my mother and brother from every document that once included them. Beneficiary lists, emergency contacts, power of attorney options, everything. I didn't do it out of spite, I did it out of clarity. Because family, I'd learned, is not about blood. It's about safety. And when people become unsafe, they lose the privilege of proximity. The last message I received from my mother came 2 weeks later. A single sentence, "You'll regret cutting us off someday." I didn't reply. I didn't even feel tempted, because I knew, with more certainty than I'd ever felt about anything, that she was wrong. I wouldn't regret it. I had grieved. I had bled. I had rebuilt. And what stood now, my home, my boundaries, my quiet, was stronger than anything we ever had as a family. I deleted the message, locked the door, and stood for a long time in the center of the living room, surrounded by the life they'd tried to take from me. They thought I would break, they thought I would fold, but instead I chose myself. And that choice saved everything.